which is Homework, Parent's Guide to Helping Out Without Freaking Out. And it is possible, and it's about you without you freaking out, not without your kids freaking out. I cannot guarantee that. So, it's more of a leadership guide than it is a study skills guide. And that's going to be the interesting thing about this morning. We're going to be talking a little bit about your kids, but we're going to be talking mostly about you. Okay, because leadership, you really have to focus on the leader, which kind of makes sense. I also wrote a book called The Don't Freak Out Guide to Parenting Kids with Asperger's. I co-wrote that book. I actually was doing one of these presentations over at Lunsford, and I had a parent come up to me and say, let's write a book together. I have a kid with Asperger's. I love your concepts. I love the way that you're thinking about leadership. And so we wrote a book together. So I co-authored that with Sharon Fuentes. And it's probably sold 3 times as many books as mine has. She's a better writer, she's a better storyteller, and it's kind of in her voice. So if you have a kid with Asperger's, or any parents who might have kids with Asperger's, it's a great resource. And I have attention deficit disorder, and so actually writing a book was quite difficult for me to stay focused on it. And so I figured out this concept that was called the Pomodoro technique. And the idea is that you kind of take short bursts of concentration, and then you take shorter breaks. And nobody had written anything for kids with this concept, and so I wrote just kind of a quick workbook called the Focus Booster. So it's kind of my authoring stuff. I'm thinking about co-authoring a couple other books right now. One with adults with attention deficit disorder, and then one with how do you raise teenagers into adults. It's an interesting thing. I'm trying to kind of change my verbiage with some of this stuff. I'm not saying how do you raise kids, because we don't raise kids. They're already kids. What we're raising is adults, and so how do you raise adults is a lot of the work that I focus on, particularly with teenagers, because they're already kids. It's like we don't say, how do I raise a sapling? It's how do I raise a tree? So a lot of this is going to be figuring out how do we do that. I'm also a dad. If you know my daughter, don't tell her that I showed you these. She is 16 years old right now. Those pictures are probably when she was closer to 13. So I figured it's an apropos one for this morning. She considers herself an academic. She considers herself an athlete. And she would be what I would consider an anxious student. Now, I'm going to explain why I'm kind of cubbyholing my kids, why I'm kind of labeling them in a little while. But I would identify her as an anxious student. And I have a son, Max. Again, kind of an older picture. He's 18 now. He would identify himself as an entrepreneur. He developed, he plays lacrosse, and he developed a mesh product, like a wax mesh product, that he sells at sporting goods stores nationally. He sells it online and at tournaments and stuff. He's been very successful with it. Almost all of it on his own. He developed, figured out how to develop websites and, all that stuff on his own. Developed relationships with wholesalers, with suppliers, made a lot of mistakes. And I would consider him a responsible student. Sounds like the ideal, right? And it is the ideal. Having what would be considered a responsible student. There are some significant challenges with raising, a responsible student, though, because there's definitely some challenges, which I'll talk about in a bit. So that's them. In my day job, so to speak, even though I do it in the evenings a lot, is as a licensed professional counselor in private practice. So what that means is I work with kids and families like on an hourly basis in my office. I have an office in Leesburg, and I have an office in Reston. And I think the main thing that I focus on is how do I assist change happening? People are looking for change either in their emotions, in their thoughts, in their behaviors. And a lot of what I work with are kids with depression, anxiety, attention deficit disorder, difficulty with behavior, difficulty doing well in school. You know those kids that you know they should be doing better. Whether that's through their behaviors or feeling better or doing better in school, and what's getting in the way. And that's kind of what I specialize in. So how to create change. The unique thing that I do that I think a lot of other folks don't do is the idea of that I rarely just work with the student in the room. Almost every session I'm also including the parents. They've come, I don't want them just to sit out in the waiting room, while I do work for an hour. A lot of my work is much more systemic. There's particularly with kids and teenagers, being able to create change just by working with the kid is really difficult. So, I can leverage change much better when I've got the parents involved. So that's kind of a unique piece that I bring to it. A lot of counselors will just work with the kids. So that's a lot of what I do. And I was doing that, kind of finding the same things happening over and over again. I kind of developed this thought in my head on what are the leadership approaches that parents should use when it comes to some of these issues. And my wife was like, Neil, you should write a book about that. And that's what became this whole concept. It became the book, and it became kind of my approach. Because I'm much more interested in getting these ideas out much bigger than just one at a time in my office. So that's what we're going to focus on today, is how that's going to happen. So, like I said, we're going to talk about your kids and study skills first. We're going to spend a little bit of time on that. And then we're going to shift into you all. So the thing to keep in mind is, as far as study skills are concerned, when you Google study skills, you're going to see some of the same things over and over again that are false. One is study in a quiet location, free of distractions. Okay. Study at the same place every day, and study at the same time every day. And what we found is, for most kids, those things aren't necessarily the best way to go about it. Okay. For instance, music. Music, for the majority of activities that are done for homework, music is fine. Okay? Music is actually beneficial. But what we found is that when music is happening while you're studying, while you're learning, material, the learning increases. Knowledge retention goes up, which is fascinating, because we used to think that really wasn't the case. Now, what people have said before is, music is okay, but as long as there's no words to it. Raise your hand if your kids listen to music without words. No, they don't tend to, okay? They're not sitting around listening to instrumental music or classical music. They're listening to music with lyrics, and that's fine. There has actually been no studies that says that music with lyrics is less effective than music without lyrics. The one area that it doesn't tend to work with is like reading for content for the first time, like reading novels, reading fiction, reading the material for the first time. Filling out a study guide and having to go back and reference a chapter, it's fine. Music is helpful. Math is hugely helpful to have it. Memorizing things, flashcards, things like that, it's very helpful. So kind of keep that in mind when you're thinking about music. Is okay. They can use headphones so that you don't have to listen to it necessarily. TV though is not fine. TV is not fine because TV sucks you in visually. The amount of your brain that is dedicated to visual processing is huge versus auditory processing. And so you cannot have the visual processing happening and at the same time being able to focus on something. So, TV, YouTube, all right, all that stuff, Netflix, etc. Well, it's like background. No, it's not background. If it's visual, it's much harder. So, no TV. Study different times of the day. Okay, different times of the day actually increases the likelihood you're going to learn the material, which is great for our lifestyle. Okay, is your Monday the same as your Tuesday, as your Wednesday? most of our lifestyles are not like that. It's like, okay, we come home and we do this, and then we do that. There's stuff, different things happening every day. That's okay. It actually enhances learning. Studying, particularly if it's a memorization thing, studying right before you go to sleep. Like 5 minutes, reviewing the vocabulary words one more time, going through the flashcards one more time, actually increases the likelihood that you're going to remember it the next day. Okay, one more time, like right before you're eating breakfast and you're going through it one more time. It actually enhances it. All right, and different locations. Your kids don't have to study at the exact same place or do their homework in the exact same place every single time. All right, we have it's kind of like one of these tables here, like a 6-foot table, in our call it a playroom, although they're 16 and 18, so they don't really play anymore. And each of them has this table that they use, and it's basically a staging area. They rarely actually use it for homework. They're on their bed. They're, my daughter is at her makeup table. She's in the living room. She's on my computer because her computer's acting up. Different locations actually helps. Studying in the car, if you can do that. I can't do anything in a moving vehicle as far as, reading anything. Fantastic. It's okay to do that in different locations. Okay, make sense? Mm-hmm. Fantastic, good. All right. So let's talk about willpower. There's a new word now. It's not a new word, but it's a new meaning for it, which is grit. Anybody heard that one yet? Grit is the idea that stick-to-itiveness. Willpower is the idea that you're not feeling it, but you're doing it anyway. You're not excited about it, but you're going to do it anyway. What we used to think about willpower was that it was much more like a muscle. Okay, that you could, if you worked hard at it, you could grow it. Okay, that you could get more willpower. And what we've learned about willpower is it is much more like a fuel tank. You can fill it and you can empty it. Okay? And it is basically the same size. You cannot increase the size of your willpower fuel tank. It's interesting, isn't it? Okay, so I have a little video that I want to show you that kind of, enforces this idea. Pardon the advertising.
I hear something a lot about change, and that is that people don't change because they're too lazy. I want to go to bat for the lazy people for a second.
Y'all hear?
Because I think that what looks like laziness is often exhaustion. Let me tell you about a fascinating study in psychology. So picture the scene. Some students come into a lab, and it smells amazing. Somebody's just baked fresh chocolate chip cookies. And in front of them is a table, and on the table are 2 bowls. And one of the bowls has the fresh baked chocolate chip cookies. The other bowl has a bunch of radishes. Now, some of the students are asked to eat a couple of the cookies, but to leave the radishes alone. Another group of students is asked to eat several of the radishes, but to leave the cookies alone. Now, while these radish eaters are sitting there nibbling on this rabbit food, the researchers go out of the lab. They're trying to induce temptation. They're trying to see, will these radish eaters sneak a cookie? It's kind of sadistic when you think about it. But the radish eaters are strong. They resist the cookies. Not a single one of them sneaks one. And meanwhile, as you can imagine, the cookie eaters don't experience the same kind of temptation to binge on the radishes. So, study appears to be over. And then both groups are asked to go on to a second step that doesn't appear to be related. It looks like a kind of logic puzzle, where they're asked to trace out a complicated geometric shape without raising their pencil above the paper. Unbeknownst to them, this task was designed to be impossible. Can't be done. The researchers simply wanted to see how long they would persist in a difficult task. Well, so the cookie eaters, they try, and they try, and they try, and they go on for an average of 19 minutes trying to solve this impossible puzzle. The radish eaters, they last on average 8 minutes. Why this huge gap? Well, the answer may surprise you. The radish eaters ran out of self-control. After they were reining themselves in, resisting those cookies, they didn't have enough energy left to rein themselves in to keep doing a frustrating task. And this is something that psychologists have proven again and again. Self-control, in the broad sense of the term, meaning anytime we're really monitoring our own behavior carefully, is exhaustible. That helps to explain some common things we all experience, like when we're at work and it's been a really hard day and we come home and we're more likely to snap at our partners or to eat more than we should. Now, here's why all of this matters for change situations. Because in almost every change situation, what we're doing is we're substituting new, unfamiliar behaviors for behaviors that are older and more comfortable. And that burns self-control. So think of your morning routine, for instance. You have a way, a system for showering and brushing your teeth, and you've been doing it for so long it's unconscious, it's effortless. What if you wanted to redesign the whole thing from top to bottom? You could do it, but it would take tremendous self-control. You would have to monitor yourself every second of the morning.
I'm going to stop him there. I'm going to move to the next one so that you don't have to see him with his mouth open. So think about, this in my mind is very fascinating, because the most difficult times for most families is when? Like in the afternoon. You can flip the lights back on, because I've got another video in a little bit, but it'll be 5 minutes or so. In the afternoon. Okay, why? Because everybody's self-control is depleted. That your kids have been at school all day. You've been either working or working, all day. You've not just been sitting around taking a bath and relaxing, okay? That your self-control depletes and depletes and depletes throughout the day, unless you find ways to fill it. So the concept in my mind is the idea of fuel tank management, okay? If this is depletable, this is like this, eating a cookie versus eating a radish and trying to avoid the cookie, that 5-minute activity burned enough self-control to where they could not do an impossible task. It took twice as long, it took half as long to get to the point of frustration. And from a research standpoint, that's huge. That number difference is huge, 8 versus 16 minutes. And so, you know it when you've got your kids that are just like, I can't do it. And what do you say? Well, try harder. Dig deep. And a lot of times they don't have it at that point. And so the idea is, in those situations, using shorter breaks, using shorter periods of times where you're kind of taking a break. All right, so what are the things that you can think of for yourself that kind of increases your willpower, your fuel tank? What would fill your fuel tank? What's that? Coffee? Sunlight?
Nap.
What's that?
Nap.
A nap. Sleep. Absolutely.
Exercise.
Exercise? Yeah. Ashley, could you?
What?
I don't know whether you.
I'm
I didn't know whether you were raising your hand or
here,
something.
sorry.
Sorry. Yes. Reading. Taking a bath. Okay. Playing some silly game on your phone. Okay. Talking with your friends. All those types of things. Those are the types of things that will increase your fuel tank. What about your kids? What are the things that your kids are going to do that are going to increase their fuel tank?
Time outside.
Time outside.
Play video games.
Playing video games. Absolutely. What else?
Watch TV.
TV. YouTube. Yeah. The amount of time our TV is off these days is phenomenal. I don't know if you all have noticed that. But they're still on screens all the time, but they're just much smaller screens. They're watching YouTube videos a whole lot more than, and Netflix. I don't know about Netflix at this point. My jury's still out on that. It's amazing, and my gosh, it's a time suck. Especially now that they're putting out these whole series on one day, and you can't just, okay, you know what? I'll just watch one, and then I'll wait a week, and then I'll watch another one. And most people don't do that. They're going to watch the whole thing. And I like the term binge watching much better than, they used to call it marathons. You know, like I'm going to do a Star Wars marathon. It's not a marathon. You know, you're watching TV. So, yeah, time with friends, time on their phone. Okay, those types of things are going to increase their fuel tank. So keep that in mind as far as, you know, when they're completely spent, they are often completely spent. Okay? All right, so let's talk about instant gratification versus delayed gratification. Anybody heard of the marshmallow experiment? I know you all have. I did a presentation at Leesburg Community Church on Wednesday, so some of these concepts are repeats. So the marshmallow experiment basically was an experiment done on the concept of instant versus delayed gratification. So it was done initially with a group of 3-year-olds, and they would bring a 3-year-old individually into the lab and put them at a little table and a little chair and put a marshmallow in front of them. And they said, you know, you can eat this marshmallow right now if you'd like, or if you wait 15 minutes and don't eat the marshmallow, then I'm going to bring in a second marshmallow, and then you can eat both of them. But if you eat the first marshmallow within that 15 minutes, you don't get a second one. Okay? Make sense? And then they left them in the lab alone, without a clock. 3-year-olds can't really read a clock, hopefully. Okay? And basically videotape them to see whether they were going to eat the marshmallow or not. So I have a little video I want to show you. These kids are older than 3 years old, but it gives you an idea of how tempting this little experiment is for 3-year-olds.
You can eat this marshmallow now, or you can wait until I come back and I'll give you 2 marshmallows. If you decide to change your mind, that's fine, okay? Okay, I'm gonna push you in a little bit more. Oh. I'll be back in a few minutes.
You want to have 2 marshmallows? Yeah. Then don't eat the marshmallow.
Hey Lola, how'd you do?
Good, I was waiting.
You were waiting, good job. Here's your second marshmallow.
Thank you.
You didn't eat your marshmallow. Now, so you get another one.
That took a little bit too long.
I know, I'm sorry.
All right, so they did this with 3-year-olds. You know, those kids are, I don't know, how old would you say those kids were? Like 5 or 6, yeah, exactly. You get to turn it back on, thanks. And if you just YouTube, you know, search on "Don't Eat the Marshmallow" on YouTube, it's hilarious because there's multiple videos of kids trying not to eat the marshmallow. It's extraordinarily difficult. And what we would think, for 3-year-olds wouldn't be able to do this. They shouldn't be able to avoid it because we used to think that 3-year-olds can't predict into the future enough to do like an if-then statement. If I do this, then I do that. Okay. So they did this experiment, and what they found was that about 2/3 of the kids ate the marshmallow within that 15 minutes. They could not avoid that. They ate it. And about a third, and we're going to call them marshmallow eaters. Okay? And then about a third were marshmallow waiters, which means that they waited that 15 minutes and did not eat the marshmallow. Okay? That's kind of interesting, but you know, the research really didn't go anywhere because you can't really extrapolate much for this. The interesting part was 15 years later, 15 years later, the researcher was able to track down every single one of these kids, these 3-year-olds. And now they're about 18, 19 years old. And he asked them questions and asked their parents questions about how they're doing in life. Like, what's their behavior been like throughout childhood? What are the grades? If they're planning on going to college, are they going to college, or are they, applying for college, or gotten in, accepted yet? Because they're around 18, that would be happening. What's their self-esteem like? How do they feel about themselves? So all these types of questions, just to get an idea of generally, is this kid generally doing well in life at 18, or not doing well in life at 18? So now there could be some interesting results, because now this has turned into what's called a longitudinal study, 15 years later. Okay? And what they found was the marshmallow eaters, these guys, okay, so the 2/3, about half of them were unsuccessful in life. And they had to probably delineate somewhere where it's successful versus unsuccessful, but they found that about half of them were unsuccessful. Half of them were successful in life. Okay? Do you kind of have an idea whether your kid is a marshmallow eater or a marshmallow waiter? Or your kids? Okay. If you participated in a trick or treat, that's always a great way to figure out what you've got. Did your kid come home and empty the whole bag and start organizing and ask for little baggies, to split it up into different groups and stuff like that? Then you probably got a marshmallow waiter. Okay. If your kid comes home and the bag is about half full of just empty wrappers because they've been eating it along the way, okay, you probably have, a marshmallow eater, an extreme marshmallow eater. It's like, why is yours so much lighter than your sister's? Okay. The interesting part was the marshmallow waiters. Every single one of the marshmallow waiters were doing well in life. Okay. They were doing well in life. And that's one of the reasons why this study has kind of gotten viral and people know about it, and it's become a little bit more a part of the common lexicon, is because this is so interesting. All right, that basically these kids at 3 years old, if a kid can avoid eating a marshmallow, the likelihood that they're going to be successful in life is very high. All right. Now, in my mind, they aren't the most interesting part of this study. They really aren't. Okay, because these kids, it's our job just not to mess them up. As long as we don't mess them up, then things will be okay. It's these kids that are most interesting to, these kids that are most interesting to me is, how did the marshmallow waiters become successful? Okay? And that's where I think we can be influential, is how do we lead our kids in such a way that there's going to be a likelihood they'll be successful. These kids, we just got to watch out that we don't mess them up. Okay? How do we help them become more successful? A lot of it is up to them. We know that. The difficult thing about raising kids into adults is they are human beings. They are autonomous beings. Okay? They think for themselves. We cannot make them do anything. Not after a certain age, and that age is pretty young. Okay? So it's a lot more about influence and leadership, because these kids, these little things, have their own brains. So how do we do that? Okay. How we're going to do that is to find a solution, finding an approach based on what the child is doing, not based on what we're feeling. One of the biggest difficulties is when we parent from our anxieties. When we parent from our anger, okay? Anger and anxiety in my mind is kind of the same thing. It's that churning. It's the letting our emotions decide how we're going to parent. When we parent from a set of principles, our effectiveness skyrockets. Now, I'm going to give you a set of principles that we're going to focus on in here. And there are many different approaches to leadership, parent leadership. And I'm going to give you mine. And mine is unique because the thing is, you're going to pick a leadership style based on what your kid is doing, not based on anything else. But what your kid is doing will determine how you parent your kid. So, Let's figure out what your kid is doing. These are all the different approaches that students take to school. All right? These aren't just necessarily school related. These are a lot of issues in life, but we're focusing on school today. So let's start with the "it's not my fault" students. Okay? So the "it's not my fault" student is their response to challenging situations is, "It's not my fault. I didn't know. I didn't write it down. Nobody told me to." Okay? You hear it?
Mm-hmm.
Now they often drift to the blamer pretty quickly. Okay? So the blamer is, it's somebody else's fault. Right? It's not my fault, it's somebody else's fault. And it tends to go in a certain cycle. So the first is, it's not my fault. I didn't know. Okay. Nobody told me to write it down. And then it becomes whose fault? The teacher's fault. Okay. It's fascinating when students tell me the teacher hates me. You know, and I don't necessarily say this aloud, but teachers are professionals. They don't really have that strong, shouldn't at least have that strong of emotion where they hate or love their students. We say that, as professionals. Oh, I love my students, but not like your own kids. I enjoy my students, but and I have never really heard a teacher say, "I hate that kid." That kids don't understand that the parents don't have. Teachers don't have that strong of an emotion about it. So they'll blame the teacher. The teacher didn't tell me. I didn't know I was supposed to. The teacher has it out for me. You know what? Other kids are doing the exact same thing I'm doing, and she always gets me in trouble. Okay. So then, and when that doesn't work, then who does the student blame? You all. Then the student will blame you all. Yes. You're being unreasonable. Don't you understand? C's are average. They say that over and over again. C's are average. Why are you expecting so much from me? Okay, so then it becomes that you're the problem. So that's kind of the blamer's MO. That's how they kind of approach life. And there's the defiant student. Okay, the defiant student is not going to do what you want them to do. There's two types of defiant students. In my family, my big brother was the in-your-face defiant student. Where he's like, my parents would say, "It's time to do your homework. You got to get this project done." He'd be like, "No, I'm not going to do it. Forget it. You can't make me." And then a fight would ensue, every single time. And then, so I watched this happen, as 4 years younger. I'm like, there is such an easier way to do this. Okay, just smile and nod and say you're going upstairs to do your homework, and then just don't do it. There's 50% likelihood they're not going to check on you. So there's half the time where you're not going to get in trouble because they'll forget. Okay, and that's what I call the sneaky defiant, which I definitely was the sneaky defiant. Time to go weed the garden. Okay, and then go somewhere else. So that's the sneaky defiant kid. There's the procrastinator. Procrastinators are the most optimistic people in the world. If you think about it. Tomorrow, I will have so much energy. Okay, I'll be in a good mood. I'll be able to get this done. You hear it? So procrastinators, they're always putting something off, and oftentimes it is because they have an overdeveloped sense of optimism about what's going to be in the future. And there's a relief to it when you put something off. For many people, not necessarily for anxious people, but for many people, they can just say, I'll do it tomorrow. That's so nice. And it's this kind of feeling, this nice feeling to have. So that's a procrastinator. There's the responsible student. Like I said, the responsible student has kind of ups and downs. It's not that they're always getting things done. The challenge of parenting a responsible student is the downs. When they're struggling with something, how do you approach it? And I'm not going to go into the details yet, but so the responsible student can still produce a lot of stress, but differently than like the unmotivated. The unmotivated student just looks like they don't care, that they're not interested. And it's probably the most of what I work with. I work with kids with all these issues, but the unmotivated one is a big one because every kid has motivation towards improving their lives. Every person does when we're born. You know, when you've got a 3-year-old that's doing a stick figure, they want to do it better each time. It's our natural tendency as humans to develop skills, to improve our skills. And so if that's taken away, you know, if a kid doesn't have that desire to get better at something, something's happened that's kind of taken that away. And whether that's like a learning disability, an attention deficit disorder, a self-esteem issue, you know, depression, anxiety, but kind of something's in the way with that. So those are the ones that I'm most interested in because I work with a lot of them. There's the anxious student. You know, there's 2 types of anxious students as well. They're the types that are doing really well in school because their anxiety is driving them. So they look like everything's fine. You know, we have so much more anxiety in particularly middle schoolers these days than we have ever had. And many of them are still maintaining and doing well in school, but the difficulty is they're pretty miserable inside. You know, it's not a fun place to be anxious, because you're constantly vigilant on what if I do badly, what if I do badly, and there's a lot of perfectionistic tendencies. And then there's the anxious kids that can just kind of say, I don't even want to think about that. I'm going to put it off. I'm going to take it out of my head. And so they're not doing as well in school because they're developing coping mechanisms so that they don't have to think about being so anxious. So lots of anxiety in kids these days. And the disorganized kid, you know, particularly in middle school, you have this great indicator. You might not even know it because you might not be ever checking their lockers. But, you know, next time you're at school, after school, just ask your kid, let me see your locker. See how they respond. They're like, yeah, that's private. You know, you definitely need to see the locker. There's this concept that I call locker snow, okay, which is the accumulation of papers at the bottom that build up over time. I also call it backpack snow. Have you checked the bottom of your child's backpack recently? I used to do a study skills group, and one of the things that I would do is, like, I would give an award for the most unusual or disgusting thing in the backpack, you know, under the pretense of them cleaning their backpacks. But yeah, there was some funny, hilarious, disgusting old sandwiches, and you know, sandwiches mummify, even if they're in a plastic bag. They don't rot. You know, that whole thing of like the McDonald's hamburger that's never really rotted. That's a lot of things. You know, that was some interesting bits and pieces of food at the bottom of this backpack. The disorganized kid is a little bit different than a lot of the other kids in that they really do need our help more than our leadership. Okay. And that's an interesting different terms, help versus leadership. Inherent in the word help is incompetence. Okay, inherent in that word, it's a Greek word, okay, that it means lifting. That I cannot lift something by myself. Therefore, I need help. It's not like, well, you can probably do it on your own, but let me ease the pain a little bit. Inherent in the word help is incompetence, that I can't do it by myself. And kids do not like that concept. And that's why they respond with that, I can do it myself concept. I think it was one of the first sentences my daughter ever said, you know, full sentences when she was little, was, I can do it myself. They have a drive for this independence. And most of our kids actually don't need our help. They are capable of performing well. What they need is our leadership. They need our guidance. They need our help and directions in the direction to go in. Except for the disorganized kid. Okay. The disorganized kid, in my mind, there is something about the way that their brain is wired that makes it much harder to stay organized. And it's not just about knowing a system. You know, I'll hear people say sometimes, okay, well, we need to teach him a system. Okay, you can teach him a system, and then he's going to go home and not do it. Okay, because there is no, you know, for kids that are disorganized, there is no satisfaction in getting things organized. It's not like, oh, doesn't that feel better? And that is often difficult when you are an organized person and you are raising a disorganized person, because it just makes no sense. If you were an organized person, there's probably a great likelihood that you married a disorganized person. okay, or at least more disorganized than you are, okay, because we tend to do that to try to create balance. And so it makes no sense for organized people. It makes no sense why you would not just get things organized, because it doesn't matter for disorganized people. They are fine with clutter. The difficulty is it's hard to be successful in school without being organized. So if you have a disorganized kid, one of my suggestions is that, once a week you go through the backpack, you crack open the notebook, you figure out, are things where they're supposed to be. You do it with your child. You sit there at the table and say, okay, we're going to do this together. Okay, so that they see what you're doing. But it's important that they stay organized. And it's not a skill that they're necessarily going to learn. So once a quarter, once a month, come to the school. If you know you've got a disorganized kid, okay, let's go through your backpack. And the goal is to be calm come to school, let's go through your locker. And the goal is to be calm when you're doing this. Okay, you're going through, you're taking the sheets, and you're like, okay, what's this? Where should it be? Should it be in trash? And not with, are you serious? This was due like 3 weeks ago. Okay? That try not to respond in that way. Okay, because what you're doing is you're helping them become organized. All right, so these are all the approaches that kids will take to school. Most of them are negative approaches, all right, as you can tell. Now, what do we do with this? This is the more simple part. In my mind, there are 3 ways that we can lead our kids when it comes to particularly school. And it's being the supporter, being the consultant, or being the boss. Now, this is where the nuance comes. You get to pick which one of these to do based on which one of these your child is experiencing. Okay? And that's the flexibility of this model, is how should I parent my kid? Well, it depends. Tell me about your kid. Okay? That's what I'm going to get you to focus on. Now, I don't have the time to go through each of the different, like if you have a unmotivated kid, this is what you should try first. Now that is in my book as far as a little bit more like a matrix of, if you've got this issue, try this first, don't try this, never try that, okay, try this second. I go through much more detail and more of a cross-reference in the book. But what I'm going to give you is, I'm going to give you ways to be a better supporter, a better consultant, and a better boss. All right? I'm going to give you like a couple of ideas under each one that you can go home and start using tonight. Well, I don't know. Do you make your kids do homework on Friday night? No? Good. All right. All right, so let's talk about the supporter first. The supporter is that stuff, when your child was a little baby and you were imagining what the teenage years would be like, okay, that's the supporter stuff. You're going to the concerts, you're watching your child doing a dance and you're bringing flowers to her. You're on the sideline of the sports thing. They're coming home with an A and they're like, and you're giving them a big hug. Or they're coming home crying because their friend was mean to them, or they just broke up with their boyfriend or girlfriend, and you're there for them and you're hugging them. It's all that good stuff that we're there and celebrating in their accomplishments and mourning with them in their losses. So it doesn't sound like we should be able to mess this up, right? It sounds like we should be able to figure this out. The difficulty is it's hard sometimes to be the supporter. So let me give you a couple of ways to be better at it. The first one is what I call hit and run praise. So imagine you have a 7th grade boy, and he's been getting D pluses, and D's and D pluses on vocabulary quizzes. This is once a week vocabulary quiz. And he comes home, and he shows you his paper, and it's a B minus this time. And you say, that's fantastic. And then you keep talking. And then those things that you say end up taking that compliment and that praise right back again. What comes to mind? What might you end up saying that ends up just pulling that praise right back again?
Do this every time. Next time.
You should be, why can't you do this every time? Nice.
Next time you can do better. Get a B.
Next time, maybe you get a B. Yes. Excellent. What else?
I wanted to do with other subjects.
Yes. Now maybe you could do this with other subjects as well. Yeah. Do you hear it? Or see what happens when you actually study?
Yeah.
Whenever you say something and you use the word actually, it's probably not a good idea. You know, to your spouse, you actually took the trash out today. Thank you. You took the trash out today. Thank you. Do you hear the difference? Actually just zing. It's just a little zinger every single time. You actually studied for that. Just this one little word, how it creates such a difference. Yeah. Okay, so the idea is that if you see something praiseworthy, you praise and then you get out of there. Okay, you hit and run. You see something, you praise, and you stop talking because there's a likelihood you're going to end up taking it right back. So, fantastic. That's great. Literally close your mouth. Okay. And I'm using that properly this time, actually. Not figuratively close your mouth. Literally, I had to literally learn how to literally close my mouth to stop talking. Because I always felt like there's, these are opportunities for learning. Good job. You see what happens when you work hard? But all those, particularly with kids that are struggling and trying to get better at something, all of those terms tend to just demotivate. Okay. Boy, that was a whole lot better than last week's. Remember when you got that D-? Doesn't this feel much better? Do you hear it? It's like, ugh. Exactly. It's all well-intentioned, but the way it comes across, it just kind of sucks that motivation out. Great job. Fantastic. Let's celebrate. Let's have pizza tonight. Just keep it very simple. Now, and I think this is particularly for boys, but it could be for both for boys and girls, but be careful of overdoing it. Okay, particularly if your child is kind of trying to get better at something, don't overdo the praise. You can overpraise. Okay, that's amazing. That's like the most amazing thing ever that you got a B-, and the kid's like, really? It's not that great. Okay, the thing about praise. And again, this is a gender thing, but I think it's pretty accurate. I don't think I'm being biased with this. Is with girls and women, praise generally is a relationship builder. Okay, and with men and boys, it tends to be a judgment. I don't know if you've been at like a party, with your friends, or like a neighborhood party, and you got both like husbands and wives there and such. And somebody says, a woman says to another woman, that's just a beautiful scarf. What will happen is they'll kind of move towards each other. And then that woman might say, I love your blouse. I was going to say shirt, but I don't know. I have these weird words. Like, men don't call them blouses or tops, right? Okay. Do y'all call them shirts? Do you ever call them shirts? Okay. Yeah. All right. And so it's, that's so nice of you to say so. It's a relationship builder. Okay? For men, if you said, I love your shirt, I would do this. I would have to look at my shirt, okay, to see what shirt is she talking about. I wouldn't say that is so nice of you to say so. Okay? Men view it, and so, praise is a positive judgment, but it's a judgment. Okay? So the issue is, and I've seen this with my kids. When I praise my daughter, she kind of moves, literally, she moves towards me. When I praise my son, he kind of moves away from me. And he avoids eye contact. Okay, it's just this, it's a little bit less comfortable for him. All right, so keep that in mind. And realize this, every kid is unique. So, watch the next time you praise your child, how do they respond to it? If they respond to it in a positive way, fantastic. Continue doing it. If you kind of get that sense that they're a little uncomfortable with it, oh, come on, stop, shucks, enough. Okay, they're not just being modest. There's probably an uncomfortability there. So just be careful not to overdo it. Make sense? Okay, great. All right, the consultant. This is not a word we often use when it comes to parenting. what is a consultant skill set? A consultant skill set is, one, they've got expertise in something. That there's something that they become an expertise in a certain subject matter. They have great observational skills, and they have excellent communication skills. We are an expert, in all likelihood, at knowing how to do well in middle school, because you probably successfully did it. All right? You probably have good observational skills, meaning that you know if your child doesn't study or do the homework, they're going to do poor. The challenge is the communication skills. Is how do we communicate in a way that's going to lead to change? Because otherwise, why are we talking? Okay, I may as well be talking to myself. Have you said that yet? Yeah. And in all likelihood, if that's how it feels, then you could use some improvement with your communication skills as a consultant. Now, I call it a consultant. We call it, oftentimes we are giving something to our kids. We're giving advice, right? And when we're doing it poorly, our kids call it something else. It's a very short word, begins with N.
Nag.
Nagging, exactly, to nag. Yes. So how do we do it? First thing I want you to think about is being tentative in your advice. So, getting D's on the vocabularies. You know why, which is they're not studying enough. He isn't studying enough. So instead of saying, this is simple, you need to study more. What is going to go on in the head of a teenager when you say you need to, and then whatever you're going to say next? What are they going to think in their head? Oh, no, I don't. Okay. It is inherent within a teenager to resist what you want them to do. It's a part of growing up. It's a part of creating independence. The first piece of creating independence is rebellion. And rebellion is just pushing against whatever that authority figure is. Even if what the authority figure is telling you is right. Okay? Rebellion is pushing away from that. Okay? So, being tentative is, and I know this is going to be hard to hear, because you're going to be like, oh my gosh, Neil, how could I, be that tentative? So, I'm talking to the kid who just, is getting poor vocabulary because he's not studying. I'm not sure, because I'm not exactly sure what you're doing in resource, and sometimes when you're upstairs, I'm not exactly sure what kind of homework you're doing, but I'm wondering is if you studied more for these vocabulary tests, whether you get a better grade. Do you hear it? Do you hear the tentativeness? I don't know. I'm not the expert of this. I'm wondering if you might need to be studying more for this. Do you hear it? All the tentativeness? Do you think that would be easy to do? No. It's not easy to do. It's simple. It's not easy. Because sometimes it's so glaring what's happening. But the difficulty is if you want your information to create change, okay, but when you're being the consultant, it's much more about trying to be tentative. And then asking them, what do you think? Do you think maybe you need to study more for this? You're engaging a conversation. And even if they say, no, I don't think so, that wasn't it at all, I wouldn't have known what to study better. Okay, you've planted a seed. You planted a seed of, and you don't have any emotions about it. What are your thoughts about this? So that's the tentative piece. The shoulder-to-shoulder piece. So I need a volunteer for the shoulder-to-shoulder piece. No? Whenever you're pushed, okay, come on. Thank you. So this is a literal approach and a figurative approach. And so the concept is, just stand, face me. Okay. So the concept is, there's two ways that we can approach. We can approach it from a toe-to-toe situation. Okay. So a toe-to-toe situation is, we are toe-to-toe. All right. That feels close, doesn't it? Yeah. I used to be able to turn into like that close talker concept with blurriness. Like if I'm too close, I'm blurry. But now, because my eyes keep getting worse, that's probably, and that's just too far away, isn't it? Like we wouldn't chat like this. We'd probably chat. That's probably not right? Okay. And that's just, you're kind of wanting to go back, right? So, all right, so you're my child, and I'm your dad. I got another phone call from your teacher. And she said, you didn't turn in your history book. You said you were working on that. What the heck happened?
I don't know.
How are you feeling right now?
Intimidated?
Intimidated, right? Yeah. And I'm doing a little bit of pointing, okay? And this feels very much like, tough. Now, just turn. Okay. I got a phone call from your history teacher, and she said that you didn't turn in your history report. I thought you were working on that. Now we are closer now than we were before, okay? And I can get even closer, and that doesn't feel weird, does it? Turn. Whoa. Way too close. Okay. So we are shoulder to shoulder now, instead of being toe to toe. Okay. So one of the things to think about is when you're having tough conversations with your kids, try to have them a little bit more shoulder to shoulder. And I like doing this, like sitting at a table, sitting down, standing at like a kitchen counter, where you've got something in front of you that you're looking at. If it's an email, print out the email. If it's a, notes that you took, print out the note. If it's an interim, if it's a report card, have it there. The difference is when we're like this, you're the problem. When we're like this, the problem's out here. So the problem becomes the problem. And then we become a team on trying to figure out how we're going to solve this problem. So this is a really important piece. And did you notice my tone of voice was different the second time? Yes. And that's the figurative part. Do not go toe-to-toe with your kids. Okay? If I can remove a certain sentence from our use when it comes to parenting is this. Look at me when I'm talking to you. Okay?
Yes.
Because the difficulty is kids, when they're not looking at you, it's not disrespect for most of them. It's intimidation. It's too hard to keep focused. You say, look at me when I'm talking to you, they'll look at you, but their brain is turned off. Okay? It's hard to have intense conversations when you're toe-to-toe. Okay, so shoulder to shoulder makes much more sense. And there's an actual book written, parenting book, I think it's called Shoulder to Shoulder, or Side to Side Parenting or something like that, which is, taking this concept into much, much more detail. So thank you very much. All right. The third one is to remember the concept of the attitude of the child. All right. What is the attitude of the child? Meaning, okay, you say, you know what, we need to talk about your history. And they do this. Oh, gosh. Now, this is going to be hard, but I want you to try this next time and see what happens. Just say to them, is now not a good time? Think about it. You're at work. You go into your coworker's office and you say, we've got a problem. And she's like, oh, gosh. You would probably say, is now not a good time? Wouldn't you? Yeah, of course you would, because it's respectful. And so you springing something on your kid when they're not prepared to talk about it, it's kind of the same thing. So saying, is now not a good time? We could talk about it later if you want. It's kind of a respectful thing, and it stops that energy. Okay? Because the likelihood that you're diving in there because you just got that email, okay, you just got that phone call, you're probably not going to be at your best. And so you can be like, stop rolling your eyes. And now it becomes about the disrespect instead of becoming about the issue. So say, is now not a good time? Would later be better? We're going to talk about this. But, you can choose when. If you want to do it in an hour or so. Okay, so that's the concept of the attitude of the child. So these are three things that you need to think about when it comes to being the consultant. How to be the best consultant possible. Any questions so far? Let's get to the good one. The boss. I do the boss the last for a couple of reasons. One is because I think we overuse the boss. Okay? And it's an essential skill to have. Because there are some kids that being the supporter and being the consultant will not work very well. Where you've really got to use the boss. There are some people that like, you know what, you shouldn't have to ever do rewards and punishments for kids. Like, well, for many kids, you might not have to do rewards and punishments. Like for those marshmallow waiter kids, you might not have to do many rewards and punishments. But for a lot of kids, it's important that we have that. And that's what I mean by being the boss. The boss rewards and punishes. Okay? two concepts: rewards and punishments. And we tend to interchange them as if they're the same thing. And they're not. So I'm going to give you a way to think about how to use rewards and punishments. All right, so the first thing to ask yourself is the behavior a stop or a start behavior? What that means is, is the thing that they're doing or not doing, is it a stop or a start behavior? A stop behavior is that they should not be doing it because it is wrong, because it's disruptive, disrespectful. Okay, so cursing, misbehaving, treating their brother bad, being out when they shouldn't be out, rolling their eyes at you, disrespect. Do you hear it? Okay, that's a stop behavior. So therefore, a start behavior is what they're doing at that moment isn't bad. It's that they should be doing something else. So, brush your teeth, clean your room, pick up your towels off the bathroom floor after you use them. Anybody have teenage girls or middle school girls? Did their towels end up hung up? No. And do they use like 3 towels? God, these girls now have such long hair, and I need a separate towel for that, and then, oh my goodness. And yeah, I actually resorted to taking pictures of what mold and mildew looks like. And showed them to my daughter and said, this is why I want you to pick it up, because this is what grows on your towel when you leave it on the floor, and then you use that towel again the next day. And she's like, that is disgusting. And then the next day, her towels were still on the floor. So picking up your towels, that's a start behavior. Doing your chores, clearing the table, setting the table, and homework. Homework's a start behavior. Okay. So they should be starting to do something. So what do we do? Okay, so start or stop behavior. Stop behaviors, punishments work a lot better. Punishments work a lot better punishments work a lot better for stop behaviors. Because punishments are demotivating. Punishments suck energy out of a situation. And if they're doing something wrong, it should be demotivating. And the other thing is, it tends to mimic real life. If you were speeding here, or ran through a red light, okay, and the police saw you, you would be punished by getting a ticket. Because going through a red light is a stop behavior. So that's why punishments work really well. And I have a kind of a disciplined presentation I do as well that talks about, much more detail about using stop and start behaviors. But in general, punishments work much better when they are time limited. And the time limit is short, like 24 hours. Okay? Anything more than that, the effectiveness of the punishment tends to plummet. And it doesn't work as well. So, what does that mean? What that means is start behaviors, rewards work a lot better. So what am I telling you to do to get your kid to do more schoolwork? Reward them. Yeah, I can feel it in the room. It's like, are you serious? I have to reward my kid for doing schoolwork? No. I'm telling you theoretically, this is not a hard and fast rule, but I'm telling you theoretically, rewards work a lot better with start behaviors. So, but that does not mean you have to go to the dollar store or that you have to get a bunch of iTunes gift cards, okay, and to kind of, get them to do more stuff. Your kids get a lot of stuff for free already that they don't earn. You could just start making them earn it. We've got this amazing little rectangular box that most kids these days in middle school start getting. This fascinating little thing. It's called a what? A phone, exactly. Although we still call them phones, they never. I actually had a kid. It was in a session. It's like, hold on a second. Hey, how you doing? Like, what are you doing, holding that thing up to your ear? The kids don't use it as phones hardly ever, unless it's their parents calling. Okay. But yeah, there's this great thing that you could be like, you know what? You get your homework done, you get your phone back. You come home from school, I get the phone. And when you've shown me that all your homework is done, you get your phone back. you know what? And you could, it's a difference between viewing it as a punishment versus a reward. If you say, if you don't have your homework done, no phone, that's a punishment. If you have your homework done and you get your phone, then it's a reward because they can earn it. Yeah.
We just started that 3 weeks ago with my 14-year-old. So when he comes home, he has to hand me his phone. When he finds his homework, he gets it back.
He gets it back.
Yep.
So when he comes home, he hands the phone in, and when he has proven that he has finished his homework,
Yep.
he gets it back.
Yep.
Yes, absolutely. How's it working?
It's great. He's all of those, procrastinator, denial, all of them. But it has helped him get things done a lot quicker in a more timely manner because he wants to chat and FaceTime and YouTube and all that.
Exactly, yeah. And so one of the differences between a reward and a punishment is a punishment, it's taken away. You can't get it back until I say so. A reward is that you can earn it. The power of you receiving that thing back is in your hands. And that's the difference between a reward and a punishment. And you can use technology, video games, phones, all technology, time with friends, reading. Now, I know I'm saying that in a library, so librarians back there, don't listen, please. Reading. If your kid is a huge reader, you say, you know what, no books until this stuff is done. No, not gonna, it's not like you have committed this, this mortal offense by doing that. Your kid is not gonna hate reading if you start taking it away, if your kid loves reading. Okay, saying, you know what, that's getting in, you get your books back when you've completed your homework, because there were some kids that will escape into their books. Okay, so you think about what motivates your kid and how can you use that as a reward. Make sense? Okay, good. Now, like I said, we've got kind of this matrix here of these various things, and what I've learned is for each of these different types, there tends to be a best way to kind of approach it. That for some of these kids, that doing the, trying to be the supporter isn't really going to help, or trying to be the boss isn't going to really help. Generally, the disorganized kid does not respond well to the boss because it's not something they can do very well in controlling. So punishing a disorganized kid for being disorganized doesn't improve their organization. Okay. Generally, with defiant kids, trying to be the consultant does absolutely no good. Okay, because giving them advice is not going to stop their defiance. With the defiant kid, it's much better to go to the boss. You can still be the supporter, be gentle and kind, but the boss works a lot better. So that's kind of the oomph of my of the book, is this concept of you've got this going on with your kid. Now this is what I'm going to suggest you try to do first. Okay. Now you already said your kid has a lot of these here, that they're doing, and so one of the questions I often get is, well, what if my kid has more than one of these? Well, pick your parenting style based on their predominant coping mechanism, but also knowing that maybe in certain classes they are the responsible kid, but then in another class they are unmotivated, or they are procrastinating. So pick your approach based on their general tendencies is what my suggestion would be. Okay? Any questions at this point? Yes.
My son always compares between me and his father, how we would treat him when he brings his car.
Right.
Because his father always punish him because he get bad grades.
Mm-hmm.
I am the opposite. I see the A's, and he always says, "Mama, are you gonna punish me for
Mhm.
the?" I said, "Okay, keep this later. We will celebrate for the A's."
Right. Right. Yeah.
But he is always like, think we will punish him for bad grades.
Right. And so your son kind of is kind of worried that he's going to be punished for bad grades, even though you tend to, as his mom, focus on the more on the positives.
Yes.
Right. And so the first thing I do when I kind of get a question like that is I think about which one of these things is coming out more. Okay, and keep in mind, this is not all of them here. I didn't have room for all of them here. So what I'm hearing is anxiety. Okay, so with an anxious child, one of the things that I suggest, which is kind of counterintuitive, when we have an anxious kid, we want to tend to calm them down, reassure them, and that tends to backfire. Okay, because just reassuring an anxious kid doesn't let them feel better necessarily. The first piece, and when you're working with an anxious kid, is to validate their feelings. Like, so you're concerned that you're going to be punished for this. That must be kind of worrisome to have that inside of you. So you're validating their feelings, and then you can reassure them. You know what? But that's not necessarily what I'm going to do. I'm going to focus on the positive. The important piece with anxious kids is to validate that first. You're worried that if you're really worried about this test, that you're going to end up failing this class because you got to be on this test. Not instead of just, don't worry, it's not that big a deal. Reassurances don't tend to work very well if that's where you're starting with anxious kids. Okay, thank you. All right, I got one more thing for you. I have a little video I want to show you. And my glasses. So one of the chapters in my book is for how are we doing time-wise? Are we okay, or is the library going to be starting to be used? No, we're okay? All right, good. All right. One of the chapters was written by students, and it was, I wish my parents would. And it was written by a group of 7th grade students at Blue Ridge Middle School, and where my son went his English class. And I asked them to write on, when it comes to schoolwork and homework, I wish my parents would, and I wish my parents wouldn't. And so I put together a little video of what they said, because I think it's really important that you kind of know what your kids are thinking about your involvement with homework and schoolwork. over and over and over again was the same thing. Trust me. Believe in me. I've seen this PowerPoint I don't know how many times, and it chokes me up every single time because it reminds me, you know, of what our kids are wanting for us. You know, that we get so bogged down in the minutia of parenting sometimes we forget what the biggest part of being a leader is. You know, a leader is a motivator. A leader inspires. A true leader does that. A true leader doesn't just nag, you know, and to get things done. A true leader is kind of above that, you know, and saying, I can handle this. I know that my child is not fully formed yet, and that until they are, my child needs my leadership. And this is a piece that I think is over and over again. Trust me, believe in me. I actually had a kid say, don't believe me all the time, but believe in me. Isn't that interesting? Just one word difference. You know, that I think the thing to be really vigilant of is if you start saying, you know what, I don't even think he wants to do well. I don't think he cares at all. Kids care. They care. They're not going to show you sometimes, and that's a coping response. Okay? So keep that in mind. How can we continue to believe in our kids, even when it's really hard? Okay? Because that's where they need us to be able to do that for them, to carry that hope for them. So, kind of like to leave you with that concept. And hopefully you'll be able to use maybe some of these ideas, the consultant, being the supporter. Okay? Maybe a different way of looking at being the boss in your, you know, day-to-day interactions with your kids. Now, like I mentioned, I did bring copies of the homework book. I have one copy of the Asperger's book because I'm just about run out of those. But I sell them for $10 at things like this just because it's an easy number. So if you're interested in having one that I could sign for you, I'd love to be able to do it. They're also all three on Amazon. I'm going to hold off on that, actually.
Okay.
Thanks, though. They're all three on Amazon as well. If you want to find out where else I am speaking, because I generally do a lot of things within the Loudoun County area, the easiest way to do that, if you're on Facebook, is just friend me on Facebook, or you can just follow me on Facebook. Most of my Facebook posts tend to be professionally related. You're going to see pictures of my kids occasionally and stuff, but I mostly use it for that. I'm also on Twitter. So Facebook, just search on my name. Twitter, it's at Neil McNerney. And you have my card, and so if you want to stay in contact via email as well, I can do that as well. So thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.